The Trump administration renews its pressure campaign to take control of the Arctic island of Greenland as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention removes a series of vaccinations from its recommended childhood schedule.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the Journal's opinion pages, editorial board member Kate O'Dell and columnist Alicia Finley. President Trump isn't the first American leader to recognize the strategic location of Greenland. Back at the outset of the Cold War, President Harry S. Truman even floated the idea of buying the island. But this might be the first White House to suggest that the U.S. is willing to take control of the territory by force if necessary. Let's start by listening to President Trump on Air Force One this weekend.
We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you.
Kate, let's start with the easy question first. What's the big deal about Greenland?
Well, I mean, Kyle, I think the TLDR, as the kids say, of the podcast in general, is that I don't think Trump is imminently going to use force to seize Greenland. He's doing one of these routines where he tries to use maximalist demands to reshuffle the deck in his favor. And sometimes that works for him. But in this case, it is not working for him. And I think the innuendo and the 3-day story about the United States reserving the right to use military force on Greenland is backfiring in a significant way and actually narrowing the U.S. options on a very important issue. The strategic value of Greenland, the president is dead right about. Greenland, we currently have one major installation there, but during the Cold War, we had a lot larger military presence on Greenland. It's important now as to protect the U.S. homeland missile defense to detect, we have some radars up there that detect missiles. It's also crucial because off its coast are submarine lanes that are essential passageways to the east coast of the United States. And it also, in addition to just raw military geographic value, it also has a lot of rare earth mineral deposits on the world's largest island. I mean, I think of 50 minerals the United States deems crucial for its national security. Greenland is home to 39 of them, albeit some of them under ice that runs as deep as 2 miles on the island. But so there is real undeniable strategic value in Greenland for the United States. And that strategic value is becoming a lot more prominent in now that China and Russia are increasingly ascendant in some ways and working together in sort of an anti-Western campaign. We are reverting to a world that looks a little more closer to the Cold War. And so that, I think, does raise the salience of making sure that the United States remains the power of choice in Greenland. So it is certainly not a ridiculous idea. In fact, the president's strategic instincts about Greenland are good. And I think that's why it's really too bad that this is all devolving into a fight with our allies.
To underline that point about the strategic location, it's easy to get into a frame of mind of looking east and west, particularly when you look on maps that are Mercator projections. And it's harder to remember that the globe does not actually look like that when you form it into an orb. And so if you go on some of these flight tracking websites and look at the commercial airliners that are over Greenland right now, or at least about an hour ago, United flights, Lufthansa flights, the shortest path from London to Denver over Greenland, from Frankfurt to San Francisco over Greenland. There's all sorts of commercial flights that take that path because the world in real life doesn't look like it does on a flat map. And the same is obviously true for any kind of missiles that would be coming from Eastern Europe or from Russia toward the United States. The shortest path would be over the Arctic and probably over Greenland, which is why the United States has had a presence in Greenland for decades, and some radar systems, I believe, early missile warning systems. But Kate, given that the U.S. already has a presence in Greenland. What is it that President Trump wants to add there that we don't have the ability to already get, given our relationship with the island already?
Well, I think one argument that you hear is that the political situation on the island may not be stable for the long term, and the 56,000 people who live on Greenland may someday declare their independence from Denmark. And so, in that case, would Russia and China be able to make future inroads there? So, and that is, a reasonable thought that the U.S. needs to diplomatically and militarily hedge against. But it is clear that the inhabitants of Greenland don't really want to join the United States, and that bullying them and threatening all of a potential military action is not warming them to that idea. And there's also the reality that the United States, there is a case for creating, a compact with Greenland that looks kind of like how we relate to Pacific Island nations, where we have they are a sovereign state, we have a relationship with them, but it guarantees us the right to put military assets there and so on. And there's an argument for that, but I'm not even sure, even if Greenland were for sale, which it's not, whether it would make sense for the United States to buy it. I mean, it would also transfer to the United States all of the domestic politics of Greenland. And if you were on the left, perhaps you'd embrace this idea and start arguing for Greenlandic statehood, right? So it does have some potential downsides of purchasing the island, and it makes a lot more practical sense to try to solve the problems that Trump is worried about through kind of existing means that we have. As far as I'm aware, and two lawmakers in Congress said this on Tuesday, the Danes have approved every request we've made to put more military assets on Greenland. And there are, a number of things that we need to do there, in addition to just expanding the raw number of installations. That missile early warning capability that you mentioned needs to be expanded and upgraded substantially to deal with the hypersonic missile threat. I mean, if President Trump wants to champion that project, it would make the United States more safe, and he should do so. You could also, there's nothing in the status quo that's precluding Donald Trump for working more closely with Greenland on deals to mine rare earth minerals. I mean, that has been an enormous topic in the U.S. national security, is America's reliance on rare earth minerals from China. And the U.S. needs to break out from that and diversify its mineral supply so that it's not dependent on an increasingly hostile adversary for all these important components that go into, everything from missiles to, household electronics. And so that is an example of something that President Trump could also do now to try to increase our economic relationship with Greenland in a way that, by the way, would be helpful in raising the living standards on the island, and also encouraging the folks who live there, like we said, to prefer the United States over the available alternative. So nothing is really precluding any of that, and so I'm left with thinking that the Greenland dispute is really more kind of about Trump and how he imagines what it means to be a consequential president. And so there is, America has a long history of expanding. Alaska doesn't look like a folly all these years later. Louisiana Purchase, and then you hear the argument, well, Denmark sold us the Virgin Islands only, in the 20th century. And Trump seems to have been captured by that thinking, and that's what it means to be historic, or that will, be a gamble that will pay off for him in the long term and put America in a better position. I just think there are just any number of better substantive options for the president to secure his legacy than this enormous gamble that could destroy America's relationship with Europe during perhaps the most dangerous world moment in 80 years, while there is a hot war with American military equipment in it in Eastern Europe. And so that, I think, is really where hopefully the president's advisors are encouraging him to come out on a different spot on this.
So what you're suggesting is that if the United States and the Trump administration went to Greenland and went to Denmark and said, listen, We think we need to upgrade this base. We need to add another base here. We need X equipment, Y equipment, that they would get approval for that. The downside is that does not let the Trump administration and the president say, look, we've added to United States territory. We've made the United States the world's largest country. And so maybe that accounts for some of the more bellicose rhetoric. Let's listen to presidential advisor Stephen Miller on CNN this week.
It has been the formal position of the U.S. government since the beginning of this administration, frankly, going back into the previous Trump administration, that Greenland should be part of the United States. The president has been very clear about that. That is the formal position of the U.S. government.
Right, but can you say that military action against Greenland is off the table?
It wouldn't be military action against Greenland. The Greenland has a population of 30,000 people, Jake. The real question is, by what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? What is the basis of their territorial claim? What is their basis of having Greenland as a colony of Denmark? The United States is the power of NATO. For the United States to secure the Arctic region, to protect and defend NATO and NATO interests, obviously Greenland should be part of the United States. The United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily.
Kate, what do you make of that? I mean, the suggestion is basically that the United States would start, sending forces there, and nobody's going to put up a fight. And maybe he has a point there, but Denmark is a NATO ally. Greenland is part of Denmark. It's hard to see what's to be gained by alienating a NATO ally, and particularly if, as you suggest, the Greenlanders themselves are potentially moving towards some kind of independence on their own. Why aren't we taking the opposite approach of suggesting to them that being part of the United States or setting up some kind of defense compact would be a good deal for the Greenlanders?
Yeah, and one caveat too is that Denmark does spend money in Greenland, and so the prospect of independence is it would be a mixed bag for Greenland, and that is why it's one possibility that the United States has to consider, but it is not an immediate threat, and it certainly doesn't justify the kind of military action we aren't ruling out on a NATO ally and a country that is currently friendly to us. I do think, just taking aside the Greenland issue for a moment, this could backfire and radiate into a larger problem for the president. It has this sort of online MAGA entertainment element to it, where this is all fun and games and jokes online, but it really could cascade into something that wouldn't be good for the president. And by that, to give you a practical example, I mean, the Europeans have, outright condemned the president's remarks on this. It is dividing the United States from Europe, and perhaps the Europeans are, taking it more seriously than Trump really intends it. But the point is that it's becoming another wedge issue for Vladimir Putin to split off the U.S. from Europe. And the singular question right now in the larger competition with Russia and China, or at least a very, very important one, is what is the outcome in Ukraine? What kind of peace settlement is Donald Trump able to extract, and is it favorable to the free world? And if we are fighting with our friends about Greenland, that is going to be more leverage for Putin to divide the United States and Europe. And remember, going back to the original discussion topic, the reason the United States needs to care about Greenland, it involves, by the president's own report, Russia and China's own efforts to have influence in the Arctic. And so that is why, practically speaking, I think the current posture on Greenland is actually helpful to Vladimir Putin's kind of immediate aims in Ukraine. And so that's just one practical reason. I mean, another one too is that the successful U.S. presidents steward their alliances, and they steward public opinion. And the president is starting to get out on an island, to use a bad metaphor, not taking those items seriously. And I think this could radiate into a larger problem in that sense.
Let's turn to the latest from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. On Monday, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention unveiled a new childhood vaccine schedule that removes some of the previously recommended immunizations. Alicia, what are the changes and what's your read of what's going on here?
Well, what they did is essentially overhaul the vaccine schedule, and there were many, many changes that were made that weren't actually well explained and were actually differed in some of the actual documents that they put out versus some of the public statements. But in essence, what they did was they eliminated certain vaccines, rotavirus, hepatitis A, B. There are a couple actually different vaccines for meningitis, flu, as well as COVID from routine recommendations. So these various vaccines would either now be recommended for shared clinical decision making or for quote unquote high risk individuals. And there's a lot of ambiguity on who is a high risk individual. Is it, in the case of meningitis, they said, well, college, freshmen who are going into college dorms, even though meningitis even commonly occurs in teenagers in high school age. It's transmitted often through saliva, through shared utensils, as well as kissing. In any case, this is a long ways of saying that they essentially stopped recommending or changed the recommendations for about 7 vaccines that were recommended for routine immunization, creating a lot of confusion. They had to put out some public statements saying, oh, don't worry, that these will still be covered by your insurance companies under federal mandates. But even that isn't entirely clear. I suspect that insurers will nonetheless still cover them because of the benefits outweigh the minimal costs. But I think that what was really going on is this is a play, another RFK play to help his trial attorney friends. And we can get into more of that later.
Well, that's what I was going to ask next, because these are recommendations from the government. But what practical effect do they have on the ground? I mean, there is a question about the messaging from public health authorities, whether these RFK changes are doing more to undermine public confidence in these vaccines, many of which have been given out for years and decades and are considered by doctors to have proven themselves as successful. But if these are only recommendations, and if you suspect insurers are going to continue to cover them nonetheless, then what changes really for families as they're discussing with their doctors, their pediatricians, which of these vaccines they are going to have administered to their children?
I think that's right, or the right question to ask. I think physicians are already, or physicians won't necessarily take their cues from the CDC's new schedule, though it does throw in some risk for them about liability if they don't follow the CDC schedule. And for instance, in a kid comes down or gets there's an injury, claimed vaccine injury or something like that. Now, I think the broader import or broader implication is that this could open up vaccine manufacturers of those 7 or so vaccines, by the way, to lawsuits. Now, under the 1986 National Injury Vaccine Compensation Program, attorneys or people who claim to have suffered vaccine injury side effects go to this no-fault system to make claims. These are adjudicated in a pretty quick fashion, and they are actually typically pretty well compensated. So this is a disincentive to file class actions and has made it a lot harder for the trial attorneys to kind of file these mass torts that you see in other respects, often against pharmaceutical drugs. As well as, you hear about talc, glyphosate and such. So it's made it harder for trial attorneys to loot these companies. Now, what happens under the law, the 1986 law specifies that the vaccines are only covered if they're recommended for quote unquote routine administration. Now, the administration's changing the recommendation to shared, quote unquote, shared clinical decision making or high risk suggests that they are no longer routinely or recommend for routine usage, which means they would no longer be covered by this no-fault system. And in which case, the trial attorneys would be able to file class actions against them immediately, and injured, quote unquote, or supposedly injured people could not make use of this no-fault system. Now, I've talked to some pharmaceutical companies, and they are going to vigorously argue in opposition against this interpretation of the law. They plan to say that no, nonetheless, these are still being routinely administered, and this kind of a semantic change actually doesn't affect the legal liability protections offered by the law. I think you're going to see a lot of lawsuits this year in debating this, and which will probably ultimately be decided by the federal courts.
Another thing I think is notable here, Alicia, is the motivation cited for changing these recommendations. This is from the Health and Human Services decision memo. And the first thing cited as a current problem is decreased vaccine uptake and trust. So the measles, mumps, and rubella, the MMR vaccine, is still on the recommended list. But this is what the changes are meant to address, according to the Health and Human Services Department. It says childhood vaccination rates in America have fallen over the past 5 years. From the 2019 to 23 to 24 school year, there was a decline in childhood MMR vaccination from 95.2% to 92.7%. It goes on to talk about the threshold for herd immunity for measles. Consequently, in 2025, there were nearly 50 measles outbreaks and over 1,800 measles cases attributed to those outbreaks. And Alicia, I find that kind of amazing because while I agree that is a real problem, it looks as if the United States, which eradicated measles, there was no domestic transmission for years. It looks as if the United States might be on the verge of losing that status now, which would be a huge loss, I think, for public health and for individual health in the United States, particularly people who, for one reason or another, are ineligible from getting the measles vaccine. It is kind of amazing to see RFK Jr.'s HHS citing that as a problem, because one of the biggest spreaders of misinformation about the MMR vaccine over the years has been RFK Jr.
Right. So RFK Jr. has in the past suggested that the measles or the MMR vaccine actually kills more people or kills more kids than it actually saves lives. That it really isn't all that beneficial, and that the real reason measles rates and deaths declined was because of better hygiene, which has been widely refuted in other studies. Now, I do think that the declining vaccination rates for various diseases or infectious diseases is a real problem, but it does in part stem from how public officials squandered trust during the pandemic by claiming that their lockdowns, school shutdowns, vaccine mandates, eviction moratoriums, and fill in the blank, were really based on science when they weren't. They were guided mostly by politics. So Americans really lost trust in the recommendations of government officials. Now, the changes to the immunization schedule won't do anything to combat that loss of trust. I think the reasoning that they're using is really just completely illogical. And if you read the statements or if you read the document that they put out, it will just fuel the distrust, because it's just that, well, doctors are getting paid incentives and bonuses to vaccinate more kids, and that they're therefore forcing kids to get vaccines against their parents' even choice, and there really is no informed decision making. It suggests that there really haven't been any long-term studies that have been done on kids to see the long-term effects of vaccines. So even if they haven't shown short-terms, like if kids aren't getting developing side effects from them within the first couple months, which is very closely tracked, maybe 5 or 6 years down the line, they may develop some kind of autoimmune disease or something, or autism or something like that could be as a result of the vaccines. Now, there are tracking systems actually on a population level in which you can look at this, and they haven't found anything. Now, I think there's an argument for maybe improving the CDC's VAERS system, which the FDA commissioner, Marty McCary, has nodded to as well. But all that said, this really isn't about improving public trust or improving vaccine uptake rates. That's the opposite of what some of the ideologues RFK really want. And I'm not sure, as I said, whether RFK really is at all interested in whether he cares about really the kids or if he's just promoting a kind of trial lawyer agenda.
Well, what I worry about, Alicia, is that we're maybe in for some hard lessons in the years to come. The Journal's editorial on the CDC change says this: the CDC estimates that the rotavirus vaccine prevents 40,000 to 50,000 pediatric hospitalizations a year, unquote. And I think it can be easy to forget how much suffering these vaccines have prevented once they're here. Once many people have gone through the vaccination schedule and don't remember what life was like before measles was basically eliminated from the United States. And if we get to a point where it starts spreading again, maybe we will learn that lesson again, but it will be the hard way.
Right. No, I don't think what I will point out is I don't think the RFK's broader anti-vaccine agenda has much carry within the Republican Party or the wider electorate. I think there's a faction of people who are distrustful of vaccines in general. That has always been the case. And it's not just on the right, it's also on the left. And you also see that, by the way, in Canada, which had a much bigger outbreak of measles last year than the US did. So I think that is a share. And so I don't think it's possible that vaccination rates will fall further, but I don't expect that to happen. What my concern is that removing these liability protections will open up these manufacturers to billions, tens and billions of dollars in damages, potential damages. And some will just decide, well, I'm not going to make these vaccines and I'm not going to invest in new vaccine research or investment in other kinds of, Moderna is looking to or is trying to develop a vaccine for norovirus, Epstein-Barr, which is causing mononucleosis in college kids and has been linked to multiple sclerosis and other actually blood cancers later in life. These are the kind of viruses and people would really like a vaccine to. And what the RFK's juniors changes do is it's going to put it's going to suppress, it's going to discourage that kind of research and investment. And it could end up forcing or causing many manufacturers to leave or to pull their vaccines from the market.
Thank you, Alicia and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button. And we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.